over. Lay down. Lay down. Roll over. Roll over. Roll over. No. Come. Good boy. Sometimes communication is hard. Hi, I'm Heather King, and I'm excited to share with you some interesting and practical interpersonal communication skills and concepts today. Hello, my name is Heather King, and I'm here to speak with you about interpersonal communication and clue you in on some of the powerful tools and concepts I've been learning recently. Before I dive into some of those super practical and pivotal communication components, I would love to share with you my ultimate goal and why I have a desire to practice what I preach when it comes to these concepts. My overall goal in learning to communicate well is to have improved and ultimately successful family, friendship, and work relationships, and to use the practical skills of communication to help encourage others who may be in need of a listening ear and a safe space to talk. I view myself as having relational gifts, and I want to hone in on that gifting by improving my interpersonal communication skills. Before I jump into some of the general tools and concepts that will benefit you in your communication, it's a good idea to pause and take a look at your unique personality and how that impacts your communication with others. The author Carbonell explains that each of our personalities is actually some sort of blend of the four main temperaments, and this blend leads to our predictable patterns of behavior. There are many personality tests you can take, and one of those is the DISC personality profile, which I took online. I received the results of my personal behavioral blend through a professional leadership report called Uniquely You. According to my personalized Uniquely You report, my behavioral blend is a high I or IC, meaning I am motivated by recognition and approval as well as quality and correctness. Based on this report, in the public area of my life, I'm an interactive, inspirational influencer who tends to be outgoing, dramatic, and I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm fairly transparent also. I'm concerned with recognition and what people think. I'm a major people pleaser, and I avoid conflict because I would rather have peace. As a high IC on the second graph of the report, I'm a blend of being an active people person while also being careful and calculating. I see this part of my personality operate while I'm preparing a devotion or lesson to share publicly with students. I strive to connect with them and be entertaining and energetic while also being thoughtful and deep at the same time. The affirmation I've received after presentations to students, parents, and teachers shows me that this aspect of my personality is probably right on target. A downside to my personality blend is that I tend to be extremely critical of both myself and others. I can be too talkative and take over conversations, and I can tend to try and force my opinions on others without listening to what they have to say. Some of these things I was already aware of, but reading the Uniquely You report was especially helpful in helping me understand how my personality impacts my communication. So now we're ready to look at some common barriers that I've seen in my own communication habits. The first is falling prey to what Peterson refers to as the flat brain syndrome. The easiest way to explain what happens with the flat brain syndrome is that you become so overloaded with emotions in your gut, whether positive or negative, that your stomach pushes against the rest of your body until your brain is flattened and you can't think straight. Now, obviously, this is just an analogy, but the image is a powerful one of what happens when our emotional selves take over and our logical thinking side doesn't have the bandwidth to process correctly. If we can't think straight, then this could lead to some major communication problems. We may open our mouths too much and verbally attack the person in front of us, or we may hear or see everything else through the filter of the emotions we're feeling. For me personally, I go flat-brained when someone says something that strikes at a deep insecurity I have. When I first started teaching, a close friend of mine heard from a parent of one of my students that I was mean. Since being mean to me was the opposite of how I wanted to be perceived by my students, this comment hit me and I couldn't think straight. The emotional side of me took over, and I was stuck on that thought for days, if not longer. When two people find themselves in a flat brain state of mind, it can lead to the flat brain tango, which is like a vicious cycle of accusing and defending in a relationship. According to Peterson, defense and attack are identical. So in order to break the cycle of the flat brain tango, we have to be willing to let go of defensiveness. Peterson says that even low-level defensiveness over little things shows that you are operating in a mode of self-protection, and that can actually alienate people. Alongside defensiveness, another barrier to communication is the need to win an argument. Peterson says that winning is about gaining power over people, and that type of behavior can actually spoil relationships. If this is something you struggle with like I do, Peterson says it will require serious self-examination and constant vigilance. Degenerative communication spirals are the final pitfall of good communication I want to address. This pitfall is discussed in Stewart's book, Bridges Not Walls, a book about interpersonal communication. Basically, communication spirals can be positive or negative in relationships, but degenerative communication spirals are destructive to relationships and can lead to more and more negative feelings, greater and greater distance, or worse and worse arguments. I can see this tendency in my own life by wanting to respond to hurts or offenses by shutting down towards that person or becoming short with them. If I'm lucky, I will quickly become aware of my behavior and make an effort to change it, or the other person will notice and we will have a conversation that softens my heart. Unfortunately, I see in myself a pattern of closing myself off to people, especially family and friends who have hurt me. I can see how this type of response could lead to a cycle of brokenness in the relationship, and I would certainly want to avoid that with people I care about. The concept of communication spirals is also supported elsewhere in literature. Listen to this fascinating find by Gottman, cited by Domingue and Mullen's article on attachment and conflict. Gottman explains that negative affect reciprocity is the increased probability that a person's emotions will be negative right after his or her partner has exhibited negativity. In a study on loneliness in marriage, Shea and Hockley make the following statement. A spouse who feels little support and much stress in their marital relationship is likely to feel more hostile towards their partner, and feelings of hostility could manifest in less compassionate behavior that would be expected to increase the partner's feelings of isolation and loneliness. This reinforcing spiral of high negative and low positive behaviors would be expected to perpetuate feelings of loneliness and isolation in both marital partners. Gottman also identified 4 negative communication patterns which are the most harmful to couples, and those are criticism, defensiveness, contempt, and stonewalling. On the flip side, Gottman states that stable, happy couples also engage in more effective repair attempts when the conflict discussion begins to turn negative. Repair attempts prevent further negative reciprocity, thereby de-escalating the conflict and creating a less negative, more positive emotional climate. Now let's talk about some resources and strategies that I believe will help us in our endeavor to improve communication. When it comes to the flat brain tango, Peterson suggests some simple yet probably challenging strategies for those of us who often find ourselves in this communication cycle. First of all, we have to let go of our need to win, and we have to let go of defensiveness, especially when someone hits us with a comment that we perceive as an accusation. Peterson calls this moment a thud, and it's actually that moment when we become flat-brained ourselves as a result of the message we just received. A practical way that Peterson explains that we can get through that moment is by a literal gulp to give us the chance to pause before reacting and becoming flat-brained ourselves. I can check that emotion I feel with what I know to be true, which may keep me level-headed in order to respond in a non-defensive way. At that point, I can practice para-thinking and para-feeling with the other person, which is basically what authors France and Weichel describe as reflecting skills. When you can reflect back what you hear the other person saying, it gives them the chance to affirm or clarify what they meant. On a different note, one of the most basic but possibly most important components to good communication is understanding who the talker and who the listener is at any given point in the conversation. Especially for talkers like me, understanding my role in the conversation will be key to avoid my taking over someone else's issue. According to Peterson, the talker in the conversation is most likely the person who is most bothered. The talker essentially owns the problem, and it is the listener's job to provide a calm and safe space for the talker to explain the problem without agreeing, disagreeing, defending, or giving advice. The importance of understanding the difference between the talker and the listener in the conversation is to create boundaries and understand that the listener is not there to take over the problem. Since I'm a talker myself, I need to practice some of Peterson's other strategies within conversations in order to keep from taking over. For instance, when a listener practices the hem and haw technique, they find a quick distraction, like rummaging for something while cooking, in order to keep them from taking over the conversation and give the talker time to think. Let's talk about action steps. My action plan for implementing the strategies I've mentioned starts with putting them into practice in the current context of my relationships. Here are a few ways I've been able to do that so far. I want to be less defensive, especially the low-level defensiveness that feels casual but can still be alienating to people. I also want to let go of my competitive drive to win at all costs, especially when this comes out in everyday conversations. I want to let go of the compulsive need to look up statistics or facts just to prove myself right in a disagreement, and by doing this, I hope to bring more of an element of peace as opposed to competitiveness to my relationships. When I feel those thud moments and my emotions take over, I want to practice taking a gulp and reminding myself of truth before reacting or responding. Since, according to Domingue and Mullen, deprivation and distance eventually lead to conflict and distress, when I'm offended by someone, instead of withdrawing from them, I want to practice remaining present and positive in the context of the relationship. Finally, I want to continue being more aware of focusing my posture towards the person that I'm listening to, as well as giving them eye contact to communicate that I'm engaged with them. I want to reflect back what people say without giving them advice or taking over the problem. Ultimately, my goal is for others to consider me a safe person to be in relationship with, whether my roommates or students, coworkers, family, or friends. I want to be the type of person that people feel safe and at home with. In his book, Peterson discusses the importance of abandoning combative communication in our relationships. He also quotes C.S. Lewis by saying, "Don't wait until you love people to act on their behalf. Act on their behalf, and you will come to love them." I believe that by taking steps to improve our own communication styles and habits, that we're preemptively taking steps to love people in our families, in our work environments, and the people who we will serve in ministry. Thank you.